close your eyes and let the modern world fade away as we travel back through the centuries to a time when castles dotted the landscape like stone sentinels rising from mist-covered hills. Tonight, we enter one such fortress, not as a tourist admiring restored halls and polished armor, but as someone who must actually spend the night here in the depths of winter. The year might be 1347. The location somewhere in the windswept reaches of northern England. And you are about to discover that the greatest challenge facing any castle dweller was not siege, warfare, or political intrigue, but something far more immediate and relentless. The cold. You won't simply read about this experience. You will feel it in your bones as we explore every trick, every desperate measure, and every ingenious solution that medieval people developed to survive their nights without becoming frozen corpses by morning. Before we begin this journey into history, take a moment to settle into wherever you are right now. Perhaps adjust your pillow, pull your blanket a little closer, and appreciate the luxury of climate control that separates your experience from theirs. If you enjoy explorations like this one, consider subscribing so you don't miss future journeys into the past. And for those listening, drop a comment with your location and local time, because it's fascinating to see how far and wide these stories travel across the globe. Now let your breathing slow, let your muscles relax, and prepare to step through the heavy oak doors of a medieval castle on the coldest night of the year. The first thing you notice is not the architecture or the grandeur, but the temperature. It hits you like a physical force the moment you cross the threshold. You expected the interior to be warmer than outside, sheltered from the biting wind. But somehow the air inside feels even more oppressive. The stone walls that surround you are not simply cold. They are actively hostile, radiating chill, as if they have stored centuries of winter within their mass, and are now releasing it directly into your flesh. You can see your breath forming clouds before your face, thick white puffs that hang in the air before dissipating into the gloom. The flagstone floor beneath your feet seems to drain warmth through the soles of your boots with every step, and you find yourself walking faster, as if movement alone might save you from the creeping numbness already spreading through your toes. This is the reality that no romantic painting or Hollywood film ever truly captures. Castles were not cozy retreats, but stone refrigerators designed by architects who cared far more about repelling invaders than about keeping inhabitants comfortable. very features that made these structures impregnable fortresses also made them miserable places to live, especially once the sun went down and the temperature plummeted. Those massive walls that could withstand battering rams and catapult stones also trapped cold air like nothing else, creating environments where frost formed on interior surfaces and water left in basins froze solid overnight. You are walking through one of these environments now, and every cell in your body is screaming at you to find warmth before the cold claims you entirely. The corridor stretches ahead, lit only by torches that sputter and flicker in drafts you cannot see, but can certainly feel. These invisible currents of icy air seem to find every gap in your clothing, slipping beneath your collar, sneaking up your sleeves, and chilling the sweat on your back until it feels like sheets of ice pressed against your skin. You pass arrow slits cut into the walls, narrow openings designed to let defenders fire upon attackers, and each one breathes winter directly into the passage. There is no glass in these openings, perhaps only wooden shutters that do little to stop the determined wind. And you realize that the entire castle is essentially porous, riddled with gaps and cracks that turn every room into a wind tunnel once darkness falls. Historians have long noted this irony in castle design. The same military considerations that made castles effective defensive positions also made them nearly impossible to heat. Castles were typically built on elevated ground to provide strategic advantages, but this meant they were exposed to the full fury of winter storms that swept across open countryside unimpeded. The thick walls that protected against siege warfare also had enormous thermal mass, absorbing cold during winter and releasing it slowly even on the rare days when the sun managed to warm the exterior. Windows, when they existed at all, were kept deliberately small to prevent enemies from using them as entry points, which meant interior spaces remained perpetually dark and impossible to warm with solar gain. Everything about the castle's design prioritized survival against human enemies, while essentially surrendering to the weather itself. You understand now why the first order of business for any castle dweller preparing for bed was not simply finding a comfortable spot, but launching an elaborate campaign against the cold. A campaign that required knowledge passed down through generations and resources that not everyone could afford. You turn a corner and find yourself in what appears to be an antechamber, a a small room where cloaks and outer garments hang from wooden pegs driven into the mortar between stones. The smell hits you immediately. A complex mixture of wet wool, smoke, old leather, and something animal that you cannot quite identify. Each cloak represents someone's attempt to trap their body heat in layers of fabric. And looking at these garments, you begin to appreciate just how central textiles were to medieval survival. Without modern synthetic insulation, or even the relatively efficient cotton weaving techniques that would come later, medieval people relied primarily on wool, linen, and fur to create barriers between their skin and the killing cold. Wool was the workhorse fiber, available from the sheep that grazed on virtually every manor, and it possessed one remarkable property that made it invaluable for winter survival. It retained warmth even when wet. In a world where dampness was constant, where castle walls sweated condensation and rain seeped through every crack, this characteristic of wool meant the difference between discomfort and death. The cloaks hanging before you are heavy with lanolin, the natural oil in sheep's fleece that made the fabric water-resistant and helped it hold warmth close to the body. You reach out and touch one, feeling the coarse fibers beneath your fingers, and the texture is nothing like the smooth wool of modern garments. This is rough, substantial fabric that was meant to last for years and to be passed down through families when its original owner no longer needed it. The weight alone tells you how different clothing philosophy was in this era. Modern fashion prizes lightness and flexibility, but medieval people understood that mass equaled warmth, and they piled layer upon layer until movement became secondary to survival. You continue through the antechamber and emerge into the great hall, the ceremonial heart of the castle where major events took place, and where, on nights like this one, the struggle against cold became a communal effort. The space is enormous, far larger than any room you have occupied in your modern life, and the ceiling soars overhead into darkness that even the torches cannot fully penetrate. Great wooden beams span the width of the room, blackened by centuries of smoke, and somewhere in that darkness you hear the flutter of birds that have made their home among the rafters, taking advantage of whatever warmth rises from below. But what dominates the hall is the fireplace, if such a modest word can even apply to this structure. It is enormous, tall enough for a grown man to stand inside without stooping, wide enough to roast an entire ox, constructed from stones that have been scorched black by countless fires over countless generations. Tonight it blazes with flames that leap and dance, consuming logs that look more like entire tree trunks than the neatly split firewood you might find in a modern home. The fire casts dramatic shadows across the walls, painting everything in shades of orange and black. And for a moment, you feel a surge of hope. Surely, this magnificent blaze must warm the room, must push back the relentless cold that has been pursuing you since you entered the castle. But as you move closer, you begin to understand the cruel mathematics of medieval heating. The fire is indeed putting out tremendous heat, enough that standing directly before it becomes almost uncomfortable within seconds. Your face flushes, your hands tingle as frozen fingers suddenly encounter warmth, and you can feel sweat prickling on your forehead. Yet as you turn away from the flames, even slightly, the cold returns with frightening speed. Take 3 steps from the fireplace, and the temperature drops noticeably. Take 10 steps, and you might as well be standing outside. By the time you reach the edges of the great hall, where tables and benches have been pushed against the walls, the air is bitterly cold once again, and any warmth you absorbed from the fire begins bleeding away immediately. This is the fundamental problem with medieval heating systems, a problem that no amount of fuel could truly solve. The fireplaces were designed with enormous openings that allowed most of the heat to rise directly up the chimney rather than radiating into the room. The chimneys themselves were often wide and straight, creating powerful drafts that sucked warm air out of the hall as quickly as the fire could produce it. While the immediate area around the hearth might achieve temperatures approaching comfortable, the rest of the space remained essentially unheated, a frozen void that swallowed any warmth that wandered too far from the flames. Scholars have calculated that medieval fireplaces might have converted only 10 or 15% of the energy in their fuel into actual room heating, with the rest vanishing up the chimney or being absorbed by the vast thermal mass of the surrounding stone. Compare this to modern heating systems that achieve efficiency rates of 90% or more, and you begin to appreciate just how inadequate even the grandest castle fireplace really was. The solution, of course, was to stay as close to the fire as possible for as long as possible. And looking around the great hall, you see evidence of this strategy everywhere. People are clustered near the hearth like pilgrims gathered around a sacred shrine, some sitting on benches dragged close to the flames, others standing and turning slowly to warm first their fronts and then their backs. Children play in the warm circle of light, reluctant to venture into the cold shadows beyond. And even the dogs have congregated near the fire, their furry bodies arranged in heaps that occasionally stir and resettle as individual animals jockey for the warmest positions. This gathering around the hearth was not merely practical, but served important social functions as well. In an age before electric lights, the fire provided the primary illumination during long winter evenings, and people naturally congregated where they could see to work on handicrafts, play games, or listen to storytellers weave their tales. The fireplace became the focal point of household life, the place where news was shared, decisions were made, and community bonds were strengthened through shared warmth. To be invited close to the fire was a mark of status, while being relegated to the cold edges of the room signaled lower rank or disfavor. You observe this hierarchy at work tonight, noticing how the best positions nearest the flames are occupied by individuals whose clothing and bearing suggest higher status, while servants and lower-ranking household members make do with whatever warmth reaches the periphery. But eventually, the gathering in the great hall must end. The hour grows late. The fire begins to die down despite the efforts of servants who periodically add new logs, and people start making their way toward their sleeping quarters. This is the moment of truth, the transition from the relative warmth of the communal fire to the individual challenge of surviving the night in bedchambers that receive no direct heating at all. You join the general movement, following a group of people up a spiral staircase cut into the thickness of the wall itself. And with each step upward, you feel the temperature dropping. The staircase is narrow, designed to give defenders an advantage against invaders who would have to fight their way up with their sword arms restricted by the curving wall. And there is barely room for one person to pass. The stone steps are worn smooth in the centers by generations of feet, polished almost to a shine by constant traffic, and they feel slippery beneath your boots as you climb. The torch you are following casts wild shadows on the walls, and the draft in the stairwell catches your cloak and tugs at it constantly, as if the castle itself is trying to pull away your layers of protection. At the top of the stairs, you emerge onto a landing where several doors lead off in different directions, each one leading to a chamber where someone will attempt to sleep tonight. The person ahead of you turns right and disappears through one of these doors, and you follow, curious to see what a medieval bedchamber actually looked like, and how its occupants planned to survive until morning. The room you enter is not large by modern standards, but feels enormous in the darkness, its boundaries defined more by shadow than by visible walls. A small fire burns in a fireplace that is a fraction of the size of the one in the great hall below, its flames struggling against the cold that presses in from every direction. The ceiling is lower here than in the hall, which helps somewhat with heat retention, and you notice immediately that heavy fabric hangings cover most of the walls. These are not the elaborate tapestries you might see in museums, depicting hunts or battles or religious scenes, but simpler woolen cloths that serve a purely practical purpose, blocking the draft that would otherwise flow directly from the cold stone walls into the living space. You run your hand along one of these hangings and feel the wall behind it, and the stone is so cold that your fingers immediately ache from the contact. Without these fabric barriers, the radiant cold from the walls would make the room essentially uninhabitable, sucking heat from any body unfortunate enough to remain in the space for more than a few minutes. But with the hangings in place, there is at least a buffer of trapped air between the stone and the living area, a thin layer of insulation that makes the difference between merely uncomfortable and actively dangerous. You turn your attention now to the bed, which dominates the room like a piece of furniture that has evolved beyond its original purpose into something closer to architecture. This is not a simple frame with a mattress, but an elaborate structure rising nearly to the ceiling, surrounded by heavy curtains that can be drawn completely closed, topped by a wooden canopy that traps rising heat, and equipped with posts at each corner thick enough to qualify as small trees. The bed is a room within a room, a private fortress designed to create a microclimate where a human body might survive the night without losing dangerous amounts of heat. You approach and pull back one of the curtains, and the smell that emerges is distinctive and complex, a mixture of old fabric, human sweat, herbs, and something musty that might be the straw stuffing of the mattress. The bed has been prepared for the night, you notice, with layers of blankets and coverlets piled so high that the surface looks like a small mountain. At the foot, two large shapes stir, and you realize that dogs have already claimed their positions, their warm bodies serving as living hot water bottles for whoever sleeps here. This was common practice, so common that the phrase about measuring cold nights by how many dogs you needed has survived into modern usage. A one-dog night was merely chilly. A two-dog night was cold. And a three-dog night was truly bitter, requiring the maximum possible number of warm bodies packed around the sleeper. The dogs seemed to accept your presence without alarm, perhaps recognizing you as belonging to the household, and they settle back into their positions with sighs that speak of long experience in this role. You examine the bedding more closely and begin to understand the science of surviving a medieval night. The bottom layer is a mattress stuffed with straw, which provides cushioning, but more importantly, lifts the sleeper away from the floor where the coldest air settles. Above this is a feather bed, a luxury item that only wealthy households could afford, stuffed with goose down that creates an insulating layer beneath the body. Then come the blankets, made of heavy wool that scratches against your skin, but holds warmth tenaciously even in the dampest conditions. On top of the wool are fur coverlets, pelts from animals whose coats evolved specifically to protect against cold. And these provide the final layer of insulation. Some of the furs you see are familiar, perhaps fox or rabbit, while others seem exotic and might have traveled great distances to reach this castle. The effect of all these layers combined is to create a nest of warmth where body heat cannot easily escape, where the air around the sleeper gradually warms until something approaching comfort becomes possible. But even this elaborate bed cannot function alone. You notice that someone has placed a warming pan near the pillows, a long-handled metal container filled with hot coals from the fireplace. A servant must have slipped it between the sheets earlier, running it back and forth to drive away the worst of the chill. And you can feel residual warmth still radiating from that spot. Without this preparation, climbing into the bed would be a shock to the system. A sudden immersion in cold fabric that would leave you shivering for an hour before your body heat could make any impression. With the warming pan, the initial moments of lying down are tolerable, even approaching pleasant, giving your body time to begin heating the cocoon of blankets and furs that will eventually keep you alive through the night. There is another preparation too, one that you almost overlooked until the smell alerted you to its presence. Tucked beneath the pillows are sachets of dried herbs, lavender and rosemary primarily, their scent rising faintly whenever the bedding is disturbed. These herbs serve multiple purposes in the medieval mind. Practically, they help mask the odors of unwashed bodies and old fabric, creating a more pleasant sleeping environment. Medically, they were believed to ward off the ill humors that medieval people associated with night air and disease. Superstitiously, certain herbs were thought to bring good dreams, prevent nightmares, or even protect against evil spirits that might prey upon sleepers in the vulnerable hours of darkness. The combined effect is an atmosphere that feels intentional, curated, designed to create the best possible conditions for rest in an environment fundamentally hostile to human comfort. You realize that medieval people did not simply endure their cold nights passively, but fought back with every resource available to them. The preparations began long before bedtime and involved everyone from the servants who gathered fuel and heated warming pans to the craftsmen who wove blankets and stitched bed curtains. Sleep was not something that happened automatically, but something that had to be achieved through careful planning and considerable effort. You begin to undress for bed, though the word undress is somewhat misleading in this context. Unlike modern sleepers who might wear light pajamas or nothing at all, you will keep most of your clothing on throughout the night. The only items you remove are your outer garments, the heavy cloak, and perhaps a surcoat that would be too bulky for comfortable sleeping. Beneath these, you wear layers that serve essentially the same function as modern thermal underwear. A linen undergarment against your skin, designed to absorb sweat and provide a base layer. Then woolen hose covering your legs, and a woolen tunic covering your torso. Over this goes your nightgown, a loose linen garment that falls to your ankles and provides one more layer of insulation around your body. On your head goes a nightcap, a simple linen coif that ties beneath your chin and covers your ears, because medieval people correctly understood that significant heat escapes through an uncovered head. Your feet are wrapped in additional cloth or tucked into wool socks that extend above your ankles, because cold feet can make sleep impossible, and in extreme conditions can suffer frostbite even indoors. Dressed in this way, you climb into the prepared bed, sliding carefully between the layers so as not to disturb the warmth that has been building there. The dogs shift to accommodate you pressing their warm bodies against your legs with the familiarity of creatures who have performed this service countless times before. You pull the covers up to your chin, then reach up to draw the bed curtains closed on all sides. Immediately, the atmosphere changes. The curtains block the draft that was playing across your face, and within the enclosed space of the bed, you can feel your breath beginning to warm the air around you. This is the principle on which the entire bed structure is based, creating a small enclosed volume that your body heat can actually warm and maintain, rather than fighting a losing battle against the vast cold space of the entire chamber. With the curtains closed, you lie in near total darkness, the only light a faint glow from the dying fire that manages to penetrate the layers of fabric surrounding you. The sounds of the castle filter through the curtains, muffled but still audible. The creak of the building settling into the cold, the occasional distant footstep of a guard on patrol, the bark of a dog somewhere in the courtyard below. These sounds are strangely comforting, reminders that you are not alone in this frozen fortress, that others are keeping watch and maintaining the fires, and doing all the things necessary to keep the household functioning through the night. You focus on your breathing, slow and steady, and with each exhalation, you feel the air inside your bed tent warming slightly. The dogs at your feet radiate heat like living furnaces, and gradually, the chill that had settled into your bones begins to recede. This is the moment when a medieval person might offer a prayer of thanks, not taking survival for granted, but actively acknowledging the gift of warmth in a world where cold was the default condition. You find yourself mentally cataloging all the layers between your body and the freezing stone walls. Your skin, your linen undergarments, your woolen garments, your nightgown, the linen sheets, the woolen blankets, the fur coverlets, the air trapped beneath the canopy, the fabric of the canopy itself, the air of the chamber, the woolen hangings on the walls, and finally the stone. Each layer contributes something to your survival, and the failure of any one of them would make the night noticeably harder to bear. This is what medieval people understood intuitively. That survival was not about one miraculous solution, but about accumulating small advantages until together they added up to something adequate. No single blanket could keep you warm. No single fire could heat an entire castle. No single strategy was sufficient on its own. But combine them all, layer them like the blankets on your bed, and you could build something approaching comfort even in the harshest conditions. time passes, and you feel yourself beginning to drift toward sleep, the warmth building around you, creating conditions that your body recognizes as safe enough to let go of consciousness. This is not the easy sleep of a modern bedroom, where climate control maintains a perfect temperature and soft mattresses cushion every movement. This is a negotiated sleep, a sleep earned through preparation and maintained through layers of protection, a sleep that might be interrupted at any moment by a sudden cold draft, or the need to tend the fire, or simply the discomfort of lying on a mattress stuffed with straw. But it is sleep nonetheless. And as you slip into it, you join countless generations of castle dwellers who found ways to rest despite the odds, who survived winter after winter in these stone refrigerators through ingenuity, tradition, and sheer determination. The night deepens around you, and somewhere in the castle, a clock of some kind marks the passing hours. Perhaps a candle burning down through marked increments, or a servant assigned to call the time at regular intervals. You do not experience the night as a single continuous period of rest, but as a series of sleep phases punctuated by waking moments. This was the normal pattern in the medieval world, what historians call segmented or biphasic sleep. People typically fell asleep shortly after dark, slept for 4 or 5 hours, then woke around midnight for a period of quiet activity before returning to sleep for another few hours until dawn. During this midnight waking period, which medieval people called the first watch, you might tend the fire if it had burned too low, say prayers if you were religiously inclined, or simply lie quietly in the darkness thinking about the day past or the day to come. Some historical sources suggest that this was considered an especially good time for certain activities, from intimate conversation with a spouse to deep contemplation to creative thinking. The midnight hour was seen as a liminal time between one day and the next, when the mind was particularly open and receptive. You experience something like this now, drifting up from deep sleep into a twilight awareness where you are not quite awake, but not quite asleep either. The fire in the chamber has burned very low, just a few coals glowing in the darkness, and you can feel that the air has grown colder since you first closed your eyes. But within your cocoon of blankets and curtains, the temperature remains tolerable. Your body heat trapped effectively by all those layers of fabric and fur. The dogs at your feet have not moved, their warm weight a constant presence that you have come to take for granted You lie there for some time, not particularly wanting to return to sleep, but not wanting to leave the warmth of the bed either. And in this suspended state, your mind wanders through memories and plans and idle thoughts. Eventually, you do drift back into sleep, a second sleep that will carry you through until dawn. And when you finally wake again, it is to the gray light of morning filtering through the gap in your bed curtains. The night has passed. You have survived. Getting out of bed is its own challenge, requiring you to leave the warmth you have so carefully built up and face the cold of the chamber once again. The fire is completely dead now, just a pile of gray ash in the fireplace, and the air in the room is bitter. You push back the covers reluctantly, feeling the cold hit your face like a physical blow, and swing your feet to the floor. The dogs stretch and yawn, apparently less bothered by the temperature than you are, their thick coats providing natural insulation that you can only envy. You dress quickly, adding more layers rather than fewer, and by the time you are ready to face the day, you are wearing nearly as many garments as you would for a journey through a blizzard. The process of washing is brief and perfunctory because the water in the basin has frozen solid overnight. A thin layer of ice covering the surface that you must break with your knuckle before you can splash any on your face. The towel is cold and damp, and using it does nothing to improve your mood. But as you make your way down the spiral staircase toward the great hall, you begin to smell smoke and cooking food, and you know that the fires have been rekindled, and that warmth is waiting for you below. The cycle begins again, the daily rhythm of gathering around the fire, absorbing what heat you can, and preparing for the next night's battle against the cold. You emerge into the great hall and find it already bustling with activity. Servants carrying trays of bread and ale, dogs hoping for scraps, and people clustering near the newly stoked fire with the same desperate gratitude they showed the night before. The meal is simple but hot, porridge with butter and honey. And as you eat, you feel warmth spreading through your body, pushing back the chill that accumulated during the night. This is when you begin to appreciate the communal nature of medieval survival, the way everyone in the castle worked together to maintain the conditions necessary for life. The servants who gathered the wood and tended the fires, the craftspeople who made the blankets and curtains, the cooks who prepared hot food and drink, the household managers who organized supplies and allocated resources. All of these people played essential roles in keeping the castle habitable during the winter months. No one could have survived alone, and the social structures of the castle reflected this mutual dependence. The lord provided protection and resources. The servants provided labor and skills. And together, they created something that neither could have achieved independently. You spend the day, as castle dwellers typically did, finding tasks that kept you moving and active because motion generated body heat, and staying as close to the fires as your duties permitted. The Great Hall remains the warmest space in the castle, and people find reasons to be there, even when their work might take them elsewhere. You notice that the household has developed elaborate strategies for minimizing exposure to the coldest spaces, timing trips to outlying buildings to coincide with the warmest part of the day, bundling together tasks that require going outside so that the cold is endured all at once rather than repeatedly, and keeping specific garments near the door to throw on for quick errands. Every aspect of life in the castle has been shaped by the cold, from the architecture to the daily schedule to the social interactions between residents. As afternoon fades into evening, the preparations for another night begin. Servants drag logs to the great hall fireplace, building up a blaze that will provide the evening's warmth. Others carry warming pans to the bedchambers, inserting them between sheets that have grown cold during the day. The cooks prepare hot drinks and food that will fill stomachs and raise body temperatures. Dogs are let inside from the kennels, taking up their positions near the fires where they will stay until bedtime calls them to their duties as living heaters. The entire household moves in a coordinated rhythm, each person playing their part in the ancient dance of survival that has been performed in this castle for generations. You watch this activity with new appreciation, understanding now that what might look like mere routine is actually a sophisticated survival system developed over centuries of trial and error. Every step has a purpose. Every tradition has a reason. And the accumulated wisdom of countless winter nights is encoded in the patterns of behavior you observe all around you. This is how medieval people survived in their castles without freezing to death. Not through any single miracle technology, but through an integrated system of architecture, textiles, fire, food, and social cooperation that together created conditions barely adequate for human life. And as you settle once again into the great hall, watching the fire and letting the warmth seep into your bones, you feel a profound respect for the resilience of these people who found ways to live and even thrive in an environment that by all rights should have been uninhabitable. The fire crackles before you, and you think about all the nights to come, all the battles against the cold that remain in this winter and in winters yet to come. The challenge never truly ends, you realize. It simply repeats, night after night, year after year, until it becomes so familiar that people no longer even notice how remarkable their survival really is. They simply do what must be done, following patterns established by their parents and grandparents. And in this way, the knowledge of survival passes from generation to generation like a precious inheritance. You are now part of this tradition, initiated into the mysteries of medieval sleeping through direct experience. And you carry this knowledge forward as you prepare for another night in the castle. The evening meal is served, hot pottage rich with vegetables and flavored with herbs, accompanied by fresh bread that steams when you break it open, and good ale that warms you from the inside. You eat heartily, knowing that food is fuel, and that the calories you consume now will help your body maintain its temperature through the long hours ahead. Around you, the conversation rises and falls, people sharing news of the day, telling stories, making plans for tomorrow, their voices blending with the crackle of the fire and the occasional bark of a dog. This is the social heart of castle life, these evening gatherings around the hearth where the community comes together and the isolation of the night is briefly forgotten. But eventually the hour grows late, the fires begin to die, and people start making their way to their chambers. You join the exodus, climbing once again the spiral staircase with its worn steps and persistent drafts, and entering the bedchamber where your battle against the cold will resume. The room has been prepared in your absence, the fire lit and the bed warmed, and you go through the now familiar rituals of undressing and climbing between the layers of fabric that will protect you through the night. The dogs take their positions at your feet. The curtains are drawn closed, and you settle into the darkness with a sense of routine that borders on comfort. This is your life now, or rather this was the life of countless people who came before you. And as you drift toward sleep, you feel connected to them across the centuries, united by the fundamental human need for warmth and rest. The night passes much as the previous one did, with periods of deep sleep interrupted by moments of waking, with the temperature inside your bed cocoon rising and falling as the fire in the chamber burns and dies, with the dogs shifting and sighing, and occasionally twitching in their dreams. And when morning comes again, you face the now familiar shock of emerging from your warm nest into the cold air of the chamber, breaking the ice on the water basin, dressing in layers, and making your way down to the great hall where the fire has been rekindled and hot food is waiting. Day after day, this pattern repeats until you no longer think of it as strange or difficult, but simply as the way things are. And this normalization is perhaps the most remarkable aspect of medieval life. The ability of human beings to adapt to conditions that would seem impossible to those who have never experienced them. The people who lived in these castles did not spend their time bemoaning the cold or wishing for technologies that did not yet exist. They simply found ways to survive and then went about the business of living, raising children and governing lands, and creating art and fighting wars, and doing all the things that humans do, despite the constant background challenge of staying warm enough to function. Their resilience is humbling, and as you reflect on your experiences in this imagined castle, you carry back to the modern world a new appreciation for the comfortable life you normally lead. The next time you adjust your thermostat or climb into a bed warmed by electric blankets, perhaps you will spare a thought for those castle dwellers of centuries past who fought against the cold every night of their lives. Their strategies were simple and their resources limited, but their ingenuity was boundless. And through their efforts, they proved that human beings can find ways to survive and even flourish in the most challenging circumstances. As you lie in your own bed now, warm and comfortable in ways that would have seemed miraculous to medieval sleepers, let yourself drift toward rest with gratitude for all the layers of protection that separate you from the cold outside. The temperature around you is controlled. The blankets beneath you are soft and clean, and no dog needs to sacrifice its warmth to keep you alive through the night. These are the luxuries of the modern age, so common that we rarely notice them, but they rest on foundations laid by generations of people who found ways to survive without them. Their knowledge has come down to us not as practical necessity, but as historical curiosity, the subject of articles and videos, and nighttime reflections like this one. And in thinking about how they lived, in imagining ourselves into their world even briefly, we perhaps understand a little better both the challenges they faced and the creative solutions they developed. This is the value of history, not just as a collection of facts and dates, but as a window into human experience that can enrich our understanding of our own lives. And so, as sleep begins to claim you, carry with you the images and sensations of that medieval castle. The cold stone walls, the struggling fires, the layers of wool and fur, the faithful dogs, the communal gatherings around the hearth, and the profound relief of surviving another night in a world where warmth could never be taken for granted. Let these images blend with your dreams, and when you wake tomorrow, perhaps the simple fact of waking warm will feel like the small miracle it truly is. The fire dies in the imagined chamber. The castle settles into silence. And across the centuries, in bedrooms and dormitories and humble cottages, medieval sleepers drift through their segmented nights, their breath fogging in the cold air, their bodies wrapped in every layer they can find, their survival a testament to human adaptability and determination. They are not so different from us, these people of the distant past. They simply faced their challenges with different tools, and in learning how they managed, we learn something about ourselves as well, about what humans are capable of when comfort is not an option, about how communities come together in the face of shared adversity, and about the accumulated wisdom that passes through generations in the form of traditions and practices that might seem quaint, until we understand the survival imperatives that created them. This is the story of medieval sleep, not a tale of suffering, but a tale of survival, not a chronicle of cold, but a catalogue of warmth. The warmth of fire and fabric, the warmth of food and drink, the warmth of bodies huddled together against the night, and most importantly, the warmth of human ingenuity applied to the timeless challenge of staying alive in a world that was not designed for human comfort. As you settle deeper into sleep, let this warmth carry you through whatever dreams await, and wake tomorrow with a new appreciation for the simple, extraordinary fact of a comfortable night's rest.